The company's called Susquehanna Glass, and we do monogram glassware.
Outstanding.
Yes. If you ever pick up a Williams-Sonoma catalog and buy monogram glass, you're getting the stuff from me.
Well, congratulations. And is your grandfather started this?
My grandfather and his brother started the business, yes.
That's outstanding.
3 generations.
That's great.
Two world wars, one great depression, and a lot of economic recession. So we've been through a lot. What I have learned in running a small business over that period of time is that to succeed, to survive, you have to reinvest in your business. Right. It simply is imperative. The single greatest economic challenge that I face today is a public that is fearful and negative. When you first came into office, your stimulus package actually funded a very ailing financial system, which was essential for small business people. Right. You turned around and invested in the auto industry, and I believe saved millions of jobs, and I think you're actually going to make a profit on that investment.
Yeah. That's good.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. And yet, your critics continue to paint you as a dramatically anti-business president. I believe you are investing in this country as small businesses invest, and yet for some reason the public just doesn't get it. I need you to help us understand how you can regain the political center, because you're losing the war of sound bites. You're losing the media cycles. I have a son that just graduated from college. He was just commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant in the Army. He wants to make a career of the Army. I want to have a business for him to come back to when he gets out of the Army.
Well, first of all, let me say to your son, thank you for your service to our country, and we want to make sure we've got a strong economy for him to come back. As I said before, I think that if you look at what we've done over the last 2 years, it's very hard to find evidence of anything that we've done that is designed to squash business as opposed to promote business. You mentioned the auto industry. This is a great example of something that we did. We knew it wasn't popular. I mean, people just, you know, the last thing folks wanted to see was us helping the auto industry. Now, keep in mind, the previous administration had been helping them, giving them billions of dollars and just asking nothing in return. But we were at a point where 2 of the big 3 automakers were about to liquidate in the midst of this huge recession, and we would have lost an additional 1 million jobs as a consequence, but also lost what is a signature manufacturing industry in this country. I mean, we built the world auto industry. And so what we did was we said to the auto companies, we are going to help you, but you've got to make some changes. You've got to make sure that we see a restructuring of how you do business. And by the way, some of the folks who made the biggest concessions were actually the workers there. It wasn't, they took huge cuts in terms of pay and benefits because they understood that their wage structures could no longer support the auto industry in a competitive era. We are now seeing the top the 3 U.S. automakers making a profit for the first time in a long time. They are hiring for the first time in a long time, and that has huge ramifications because there are suppliers and the restaurant next to the plant that's open, and so it has provided a lot of confidence in a lot of these communities. But it wasn't popular at the time. Now, there were some folks on CNBC who were unhappy with our decision, partly because they had made bets essentially against the auto industry, or they had senior debt. And we said, you know what, if the workers are giving up something, if management's giving up something, if the federal government's giving up something and taxpayers are giving something, you're not going to get 100% of what you bargained for in terms of some of the investments that you made here. You're going to have to take a haircut too. And they got very mad about it. I still remember some of the fulminating that was taking place on CNBC about it. We didn't do that because we were anti-business. We were doing it because we wanted to make sure that these businesses would continue. And by the way, some of the same folks who complained were some of the same folks who, if we hadn't taken some of those actions on Wall Street, would have lost everything they had. And they didn't mind us intervening when it was helping them. But they did mind it when we were helping some other folks. So the point I guess I'm making is this. I think that American businesses like yours are what makes this country go. We have passed 8 tax cuts for small businesses so far. We have made it easier for you to invest in plants and equipment. We have already taken down your capital gains, and we want to reduce capital gains for small businesses down to 0. All of these things are what historically have been considered pro-business agendas. Even on health care, a lot of small businesses couldn't provide health care. We are now saying, we're giving you a tax break if you provide health care to your workers, and 4 million small businesses out there are in a position to potentially take advantage of it. So, but what is absolutely true, and this goes to the point you were making earlier, John, about mid-course corrections. The rhetoric and the politicizing of so many decisions that are out there has to be toned down. We've got to get back to working together. And my hope is, and this is part of my job as leader, it's not just a matter of implementing good policies, but also setting a better tone so that everybody feels like we can start cooperating again instead of going at loggerheads all the time. And I'm going to have to do more additional outreach to the business community on that front.
You mentioned fulminating. One of my colleagues, Rick Santelli, was one of those who complained about your policies early, some of the government interventions. And here's a question that he submitted on the issue of spending.
Mr. President, if I was to ask an investor, would he invest in a company that for every dollar spent, it had to borrow 42 cents, I think that investor would think long and hard. Now, if you look at the amount of money the government takes in and what we are spending, those are pretty much the numbers for our government right now. Does it bother you that 42 cents of every dollar we are spending is borrowed, even understanding that we have to deficit spend during tough times? How long can the U.S. continue to spend in that fashion without potentially hurting our long-term financial health?
Well, it bothers me a lot. It bothered me when I was running for office, and it bothered me when I arrived and I had a $1.3 trillion deficit wrapped in a bow waiting for me at the Oval Office. So the answer to Rick's question is we're going to have to do something about it, and we've got to do something about it fairly rapidly. The first thing you do when you're in a hole is not dig it deeper. That's why this tax debate is important. We can't give $700 billion away to some of America's wealthiest people. We've got to make sure that we are responsible stewards for our budget. That's point number one. As I said before, I've already instituted a budgetary freeze for 3 years on non-security discretionary spending. That can make a difference. We've identified over $500 billion in changes to the budget that could make a difference. The one thing I do have to say, though, to the public is that about 60% of our budget is entitlements: Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. And a lot of the discretion that I have is somewhat limited on some of these programs. Now, part of the reason, for example, that health care reform was so important is because the biggest driver of our long-term deficits is Medicare. If our economy is growing at 2 or 3 or 4%, but health care costs are going up 6 or 7 or 8%, then the budget will blow up no matter how many cuts I make in other programs.
So everybody in this room needs to buckle up and be prepared for lower Social Security benefits and lower Medicare benefits in the future.
What we have to do is make sure that we take in the amount of money that we're taking in, the amount of money that we're going out, matches up. And all of us have to have a conversation. If we think it's important, for example, to treat our veterans fairly after they've served us and they come back with post-traumatic stress disorder, then, and obviously everybody here does, well, that costs money. If we think it's important for us to invest in research and development, our R&D spending in this country had flatlined over the previous decade. If we think that us being at the cutting edge in science and technology is the key to our economic future, well, we've got to make those investments. On infrastructure, I've proposed, as I said, that we expand infrastructure. Europe spends 5% of their GDP, their gross domestic product, their total economic output on infrastructure. China spends 9% on infrastructure. We're spending 2%, which is why our bridges fall down, and our roads are messed up, and our sewer systems, and our airports. All these things are in a bad way. So there's no such thing as a free lunch. We've got to make long-term investments, and we've got to do so at a time when the economy is in a tough situation. We've got to identify those things that don't work, programs that aren't working the way they're supposed to, tax loopholes that aren't encouraging economic growth, and we've got to eliminate those. And we've got to do it, and here's the biggest challenge, we've got to do it in a way that doesn't risk the current recovery. So we've got to think medium and long term, and look at these long-term projections and say to ourselves, are there some changes we can make that may not take effect this year, but will take effect 5 years from now or 10 years from now, so that we've got a better budget situation?
Let's go to our audience.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you for coming to speak with us today. My name is Andy Conti. I am a full-time MBA student at Georgetown University right here in the district. And my question is with regards to those individuals that feel like federal government is getting too large, specifically the Tea Party movement. Right. My dad and I were talking about the midterm elections just last night. He was asking who he should vote for. And the question was, what will the administration do if these activists are elected?
Well, let me say this about the Tea Party movement, which your friend Rick helped to name. I think that America has a noble tradition of being healthily skeptical about government. That's in our DNA, right? I mean, we came in because, you know, the folks over on the other side of the Atlantic had been oppressing folks without giving them representation. And so we've always had a healthy skepticism about government. And I think that's a good thing. I think there's also a noble tradition in the Republican and Democratic parties of saying that government should pay its way, that it shouldn't get so big that we're leaving debt to the next generation. All those things, I think, are helping. The problem that I've seen in the debate that's been taking place and in some of these Tea Party events is I think they're misidentifying sort of who the culprits are here. As I said before, we had to take some emergency steps last year, but the majority of economists will tell you that the emergency steps we take are not the problem long term. The problem long term are the problems that I talked about earlier. We had 2 tax cuts that weren't paid for, 2 wars that weren't paid for. We've got a population that's getting older. We're all demanding services, but our taxes have actually substantially gone down. And so the challenge, I think, for the Tea Party movement is to identify specifically what would you do. Well, it's not enough